Dear colleagues, dear students, I am happy to start my presentation devoted to the topic of how women are pursuing the war and what do women write about war nowadays in Ukraine amid the ongoing Russia's war against Ukraine. As Russia's war against Ukraine demonstrates, the role of writers, and especially poets, has become increasingly valuable in contemporary Ukrainian culture, particularly due to the rising number of book readers in Ukraine during the war. As the scholar Andriy Kravchuk has claimed, working through horrific moments of the war, creative people are shouldering the trauma of others and serving in a scenes of first responders of the spirit, whether on the front or in the concert halls. So the role of the people of culture is increased immensely compared to the time before the war erupted. This also highlights the role of the also aggressor that that has an intention to destroy the country and to destroy the culture. And writers here became as a symbol of inspiration and resilience and resistance. The writers emphasize the unique role of culture in Ukrainian society that fights for its freedom. This tendency to value culture and especially literature is further reflected in the statistical increase in the number of books published in the year 2023, that according to the official statistic in Ukraine is up to 73% more than it was in the year of the 2022. So, following that importance of the sorry, but how I can thank you. So, following for that importance of culture and literature in a time of war, I would like to point your attention to the words of Ukrainian writer Ostap Slovensky, who said that nowadays Ukrainian literature is in one of the worst situation ever. Why? Because it must be probably also it must unite all possible and impossible functions. So it forced to be everything, as Slavinsky said, a document and an act of accusation, a testimony and mourning, a threat and forever, a revelation and the restoration of historical justice, accepting everything except what it should be as literature. So the literature became a sort of documents of resistance, resilience, and the documents of the time of war. This time nowadays, we can say that in Ukraine, we are living in a time of biblioclasm or library site. What do I mean by this term? That Russian army regularly destroying Ukrainian publishing houses and Ukrainian libraries. According to the statistic of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine at the beginning of the 2025, there were destroyed around 1,056 Ukrainian cultural centers and 784 libraries. That destruction of libraries and the cultural centers is not accident. Is not an accident. It's a politic of the country of Russia, and of course it implies to the term library site, which refers to the destruction of libraries as in a notion that center of knowledges, so that the libraries will, it means that libraries will be destroyed and knowledge will not be transit to the next generation and will not be preserved. So that happens, unfortunately, in Ukraine too. While talking about literature and about the literature during the war and about the role of a writer, I want to point out that as British researcher Kate McLoyne mentioned, that each war has its own poetry, its natural way or ways of being represented, and that statement also echoes Ukrainian researcher Anna, sorry, I just who wrote the Writing the War book. So she also states that each war has its own language. And each war has its own language. It means that wars are impossible to compare. Somehow there is always a mutual trauma of war, which could be implied to each war in the world. By writing that traumatic experience, we creating sort of archives, according to the Elida Asman. And that is a system of recording function of recording the everyday life during the war, and it creates a storage for the culture and for the history. So the literature has another now also a feature and another task to be a documentation, to create a documentation, to create a storage of knowledge of how life is developing during the war. And following also that theoretical approaches, I want to mention that American scholar Jane Goodspeed Chadwick mentioned in her book that there is much work to be done to inscribe the women war narrative experience into the war trauma context. So that after the Second World War, if we could analyze some anthologies and other works that are dealing with war trauma and war topic, there are not a lot of women authors. As we go to the case of Ukraine nowadays, we can see that in wartime, women are, let's say, mostly active in a way of to be volunteers or to present a different way of help. But on the other hand, there are also women writers and women soldiers. So that women who changed their social role and they became soldiers, and they are actively participating on the front line by defending Ukraine nowadays in the time of war. Here I just presented a few of them, Ukrainian female authors who are now are service women in Ukrainian armed forces, and who are presenting not only the writers on the front line, but also they present women on the front line. And as for example, Svetlana Zhivun claims that in wartime, women are actively engaged in as service women, despite being mostly placed in roles behind the front lines of battles. That also refers to the official statistic of the Ukrainian government that at the beginning of the 2025, around 70,000 women serving at the Ukrainian armed forces, and around 6,000 of them are on the front line. And that is on 20% more than it was in 2022 already. So, following that, I want to show that since the beginning of the war, women in Ukraine were very active, and of course are still very active, not only on serving on the front line, on being volunteers and helping others, but they are also active writers. And the first place which starts to be a sort of archive, as I can state it in Ukrainian culture, this is Facebook and other social media. They started to, let's say, to be a platform where people can share their feelings and their ideas and what is going on in that turbulent times. For example, Ukrainian writers started to actively write on Facebook and to publish their poetry. Here I have two examples of Ukrainian contemporary writer Yulia Musakovska and also Halina Fruk, who are writing about Musakovska is talking about the problem of to be creative and to write in a time of war. Here she mentioned, then the poems come. Then the poems come and stand at the door like children, asking for bread, asking to be led out into the light, asking to be published. And we have her ideas how it develops, how it's hard to publish to be creative, I would like to say, in a time of war. Halina Kruk has a tendency that she published her thoughts, her feelings and her poetry on her own Facebook page, where she is also dealing and reflecting everyday life during the war time. For example, she asks here, where everything becomes simple, where simplicity frightens, where the first ice pricks the heart, you will choose between two evils. One of that escapes. So she shows that how different is the life during the wartime, and that the cultural values and values of life are changing every second, not even every minute. The first literature project that started documenting the war since the abrupt of the big war in Ukrainian Velika Vina was the anthology War 2022. This anthology is translated already on Polish language. And here is its more developed version with new writers in Polish language. That idea came from the publisher who asked a lot of people of culture and writers to document their feelings since the beginning of the war. And here, actually, we can trace how the society reacted to the war since the beginning of 2022 for 3 months period. Here, for example, we have very representative story of Katarina Babkina, who is describing how she was fleeing the war with her daughter to the west, to Poland, and how on the way, when it was very hard to escape the country due to the lack of the gasoline and transportation, how people were helping each other and how they were creating that line of helps. And thanks to that volunteering and help movement, a lot of people, especially from the east part of Ukraine, were able to escape the country. The main, I would say, even hashtag question on that ontology, which reflects and represents the whole country, is actually that a question, how are you? How are you? What does it mean? Since the beginning of war, the simple question, how are you? Yakte has changed its semantic meaning. What do I mean by that? It starts to, sorry, I will show it later. It starts to represent I love you, and also are you still alive? So the main meaning is, are you still alive? And Ukrainian writer Anna Hin created, so she published a book that is actually a diary about her life in Kharkiv, where she lives constantly and where she witnessed rockets from her window every day. And that's why she's asking, how are you? Why? Because she's asked every day by others from all over the world, how is she? The active role of women in Ukrainian defense and also especially women writers and other women of other creative professions is represented in an anthology Це воює вона. She's the one at war. What is important in that publication, that publication was made as a charity project. So the whole money which were collected after the selling of this anthology are going directly to the Ukrainian forced army or to the other help. And here we have two examples of Ukrainian military service woman, Irina Chornovus, I mentioned her before, and I will come back to her later, and very famous Taira, who is also known as so she's not first, she was military help and medic, and nowadays she also writes poetry, and we know that she spent time in captivity in Russia after the Azovstal was taken over. That is the example of that fully, let's say, anthologies which are devoted to women, and later we will see some examples that are written by female authors. In that anthology I mentioned before, War, 2022, Ukrainian author Oksana Pavlovska also titled her work as Yakte, how are you? It means I love you. And she states that Ukrainian women nowadays, they are Googling how to drive a tank and an armored vehicle. And that feelings of that we will win is always with the Ukrainian nation. That was written at the beginning of the war, and we can see that that very enthusiastic period that the war will finish soon and that Ukraine will win was very actively present in Ukrainian poetry and literature for almost 1 year, I would say, more or less. That's let's say, the peak of that narration. Here I want to pay attention to the other Ukrainian very famous author. She is Yarina Chornohus. I mentioned her already, and she also is a winner of Shevchenko Prize, very famous Ukrainian Shevchenko Literature National Prize in 2024. Yes, in 2024. Because of her literary works and of her devoting, let's say, to the topic of the life on the front line. Here we have an example of her recent book, poetry books. She published now also another book, but I will analyze this one, which follows to the idea of Heidegger Dasein, to be here, that concept. And the kinds of presence. What does it mean to be on a front line, and what does it mean to defend the presence? She is asking in her poem Square Brackets, Квадратні дужки, how the philosophy can exist and how the philosophy can prove itself on and its value. So she claims that at the door of the Russian filtration camp, and that are camps which actually check people, even Ukrainian people, even they ask to remove the clothes completely and to check if they have a Ukrainian tattoo, also some Ukrainian symbolics on phone or Ukrainian text. And when they find somebody who has something like that, so that person will be returned to the occupied territory or to sent to prison in Russia. So that is let's say, very drastical nowadays filtration camps, which are still exist, unfortunately. So that all philosophies and all ideas, they actually have that checking point, I would say, the filtration Russian camp. And here we see the true values of the whole world. How the author claims. Also, she points out a lot in her poetry book that on the front line, the values of life are changing. So that is the living on that borderline between life and death, because every day you don't know if you will be alive and what will you do, or it's your last minute. So what is interesting on that existential experience on the borderline between real death and real danger, and the possibility to have a hope that the life will continue, the thoughts about the future are still present, and they are now creating a new values and new message for the future. So she asked, if we remain alive, I will try for the first time in my life to plant a plant in a still, unmined field with the hands of a person from the city who only with the onset of war saw what lies, beneath and asphalt. What she also mentions in her poetry book, because Chernobuz is serving in Ukrainian armed forces already since 2017 or even earlier, and she was spent a lot of time on the front line. She has that experience. We see how she projects her future, her possible future, with that if she will remain alive, the lyrical hero, and what she will do. And she also points out that feelings of life that are changing on the front line, and what is valuable now in that second, and what is valuable in general. Another very famous Ukrainian well-established now poet, Yulia Musakovska, in her recent book, Stones and Nails, she shows us the perspective not from the front line, but from the, let's say, rare line. She lives in Ukraine, but she is also an active volunteer, and she is witnessing every day's shelling due to her work and due to the presentations of her books in the whole territory of Ukraine. She's describing that feeling of being in a, let's say, safety place during the wartime, and also she reflects how the values of life are changing amid the war. One of her, let's say, most program a poem, which I may call it like that, is the poem Words. Since the beginning of war, a lot of Ukrainian writers stated that they are not able to create anymore. The world and the war and war atrocities removed their words to write. So they are silent. They cannot produce or to create something. Musakovska has another statement. She says that who said that words have no value now? Our words that are being written in the air with the incandescent iron of brass that strike like clotted blood on pale lips, are cutting into the soil under our feet, settling on our clothes and shoes like dust from the ruined homes. And she states that our words, hard and swollen right with rage, black from grief like the concrete covering of an old bomb shelter. There is nothing more durable, nothing less fleeting. So that the words are the main weapon of writers nowadays, and they should use it, and they should create. Let's pay attention that this poem was written on the 21st of March 2022. Musakovska, as she, let's say, presents us that view from the let's say, safe place, ask what can be safe during the wartime. And she also wrote a poem about that. Are you in a safe place? This sounds like a prayer, repeated over and over since February 2004, February 24, 2022, to loved ones and friends. I am asking myself, am I in a safe place? Could I be? Well, what is the safe place? We can see that there is no safe place during the time of war, and it doesn't matter is it Kharkiv, Kyiv, Bucha, or Zaporizhia, or any other city. There is no safe place, and there is no that feeling of to be safe during the time of war. I want to present also the other topic, which is very active in the time of war, the feeling of grief and mourning for the fallen soldiers. Ukrainian well-established writer and poet Svetlana Povalyeva, in her book Passing Clouds with Sunny Intervals, Мінлива хмарність з проясненнями in 2002, is dividing her space into 4 lines. So the first line is a front line. The second line, let's say the fourth line is the safest line. Then we have the third line, it's a middle between the, let's say, safest place and close to the front line. And we have the closest approaching on the front line and the battle line. She wrote her poetry book, devoting it to her fallen son, Roman Ratushny, who was very famous Ukrainian activist, and he fought for the rights of community in Kyiv, and especially for the Protasiev Yar place, which should be let's say removed, but he protected that area, and he was very active also from the political point of view. Unfortunately, he was killed on the front line in 2022. Svetlana Povalyeva shows how that that language of communication between soldier and mother, or just between a soldier from the front line or anybody from the family line and friends, is different. And how the even not words but symbols can tell us a lot about the situation. For example, in this poem she's writing, at the beginning he wrote, then he only replied, then he just read. Then on the undelivered messages, devoured my sign with a white circle. Finally, they turned gray like snow. So that turned gray symbol, it means it was red, that gave a hope that he is still alive. Suddenly, the messages have stopped. The last one was red. So and after that there was no communication, so that symbols have another semantic meaning as a meaning of the end of life. As she is portraying also the life from not a front line perspective, she describes a lot in her poetry book her feelings and how it is to live in a, let's say, more or less safe but not safe place like Kyiv during the war. My skin simply knows about the rockets. Every time when they fly to Ukraine and into Ukraine, when they are flying over Kyiv, over Dnipro and Desna, but I feel nothing, not even a tickle in my diaphragm. Alive people don't feel deadly kisses. So that she is not afraid of that attacks, and that is already another reality living under the shellings all the time, and the poet show us how she reacts to that. A book which was the best book of 2022. 2024, My Women, is written by Ukrainian author Yulia Ilyuha. In she started that project also from Facebook. So she was reading stories about people's life during the war, and she was creating, let's say, general image of Ukrainian women amid the war. She tells the stories about that woman, describing that my woman did that and that. So, as she states, my women utter mundane and frightening words. My women share their pain and despair. My women believe and wait, and so on. For example, each her story starts about a woman, the woman who learned how to live in the homes of strangers, lost her own home twice. We don't have names, we don't have any other, let's say, personal identificators here. But what we can see that the general image of women at war can be applied to everybody during the wartime. That's why that book, as we can see here, it's a piece of the story which I took from this book. That's why this book is very popular now and is translated into several languages and is still continuing to be translated. Because she is presenting the voice of women during the ongoing war, and they have very different problems. For example, what was interesting for me, that there is a woman which is very afraid to be shelled and to be dressed properly. So she is worrying about is her clothes clean, and are her underwear and bra also clean, because how it will be when she will be rescued by people with, let's say, improper clothes. That is the very interesting psychological moment to investigate what are the thoughts on in the time of, let's say, a constant danger. Ukrainian other writer, Halina Kruk, published let's say, a collection of her poetry, a crash course in Molotov cocktails, where all her, actually I have it here, well, all her poetry work and poems since 2017, 18, and other years are collected together, even since 2012, some of them. So it's a sort of anthological collection of her poetry, and it's translated to English. This book was got the Griffith Poetry Prize, and represents, let's say, if we analyze the change of life values, beginning with the year 2012 till 2022, where the war has already started. And here we see the example of this poetry and how authors sees it already different. So we can see that, let's say, the shift of the mental feeling of life and the feeling of life in general. Uh, uh, as we saw in 2022, there was an anthology which I mentioned that represented the, let's say, the archive of the beginning of war for the 3 months. Here we have, since 2023, that female anthologies starting to appear very actively. Mostly that are diaries, collection of diaries, or the sort of documents that documents the life changes could be also mentioned as diaries. For example, we have a collection of stories, 25 stories about women during the wartime, collected by journalist Evgenia Podobna. It's her work, Її війна, where we can see the different stories of women and what they witness during the Russia's war against Ukraine. The similar idea is presented in that project, Kyiv Women War. And this project is created by Mila Ivantsova in 2023, where she asked women, people of culture, famous women, to share their stories, what they were doing, how they were living since the abrupt of the war, and how it influenced their life. And Kristina Bilakovska and Victoria Sereda present another project. So they state that in spite of war, law still develops and exists, and law will always win. They collected the stories of love. They asked people how their love developed, or they started new relations, or how is their life going on, with that emphasis on the feeling of love. And they gathered that situation to state that the war will not kill the love. Another interesting, let's say, presentation of the female vision of war is in anthology Motanka 2024. So what is Motanka? It's a traditional Ukrainian doll, but without face. And here the authors followed that idea that at the beginning of the war there were a lot of memes and a lot of stories that Ukrainian women are witches and what they did to enemies. And there was a very famous poem that became later a song by Людмила Горова, що сію тобі в очі, сію тобі проти ночі. So that was, let's say, sort of the witch ritual that will protect Ukraine and that will kill enemies. Following that idea, the compilers of anthology collected several stories written by Ukrainian female authors, where the main point is a superpower of Ukrainian woman who is a witch, and with that superpower she creates, let's say, unbelievable unbelievable actions on the front line, and she defend Ukraine. So in that way, Ukrainian women are also defending Ukraine. That was based also on that fact that there is an artillery group in Ukrainian forces, armed forces, the beaches of Bucha, and that is a documental fact. There are a lot of other artillery groups and other female groups in Ukrainian army, but they call themselves the beaches of Bucha. Another, let's say, archive of stories and war trauma is presented in the project Invincible, created by Victoria Pocates and published in 2023, where the stories and reflections about the war was collected from different female authors and also people of culture, and they showed their life, how they were, for example, helping people in Kharkiv region, or what they were doing and how the war changed their life. Here I just present a piece of this story. So that project which I was talking before, Kyiv Women War, also emphasize the change of the feeling of time. So they say spring has already come to the world, March, but for us it's February, and we have it in Ukrainian literature and also in the female war writing a lot, especially at the beginning of the full-scale eruption of Russia's war against Ukraine, that the time is frozen. It's still February. It doesn't matter which month it is. It doesn't matter which year it is. It's still February. That is endless February. And there are also anthologies that are devoted to that feeling of the frozen time. Here I want to pay your attention to the well-known Ukrainian author. Unfortunately, she belongs to the, as I called, shelled generation now, that Victoria Melina, who was also collecting the criminal war crimes done by the Russian army on the Ukrainian territory, and she wrote her poetry book Testimonies, Свідчення, in 2024. Actually, the book was published already after her death and finished by her colleagues. And this is a book which she also started to write in English, and this is a diary of war and appeal for the justice. And here there is an example of the people of culture taken by the war in Ukrainian culture, and when you follow that address, you can see, unfortunately, that the number of people, unfortunately, is only increasing. Victoria Amelina's biography you can find also on that page which I showed. Here also I want to point you out on the poem of Victoria Amelina, Tривога, Alarm, that there is a air raid alert across the entire country. It's as if every time they lead us to be shot, all of us should be shot, yes, but they aim only at one, mostly at the one on the edge. Today, it's not you, all clear, but tomorrow, we don't know. About the losses of Ukrainian army, the number of Ukrainian army's losses are unknown, it's classified. But still, people start to count, and the lyrical hero starts to count, and they are uncountless. That is the tragedy of the country during the war, that the losses are uncountless. And going to slowly to the end, I would like to point out that after after the Mariupol was occupied and not a lot of people, Mariupol citizens, were able to escape of city. A lot of them died and were killed actually during by the Russian army. Nadia Sukharukhova, who was not a writer, but she just wrote a memory about the war in that time, and especially she valued the life of this her life in the city. And this book is divided on two parts: the life before the war and the life after the Mariupol was taken. And we can also trace that change of values that was not valuable, let's say, before, during the time of peace, now is very valuable. Even the flowers which were growing in front of her house, and also that flowers that were on the streets in the city. The increased role of the women writing and also women publishing during the wartime can be presented on the example of the creative publishing house, Creative Women Publishing, that was created already in 2018, but became very active actually now. And one of the leader of this publishing house project is Oksana Borovets. And Irina also, Irina Nikolaichuk, and the other active members, they are following that idea that the women voices should be presented in the time of war. And they already published the first book for the women writing anthology from different, that was republished from 1887, and nowadays, a few months ago, they published a new book, which is also devoted to the women writing and the presenting women voices in a time of war. Here, I want to present you special issue of the World Literature Studies, where you can find, which is devoted to the Ukrainian literature as a witness of the Russia's war against Ukraine, and devoted to the different topic of the development of Ukrainian literature amid the war. That are the articles of Ukrainian contemporary scientists that highlights that problem from the different perspectives. So that can bring you more idea how that female narrative develops amid the war. And here are my conclusions, that what we can see, the image of women are changing now in Ukrainian society due to the war, of course. Now women are having, let's say, different occupations compared to the time before the war, due to the war now, yes? And that life on the borderline, we have the different perspective from the front line poets, female poets, and life on, let's say, safe, rare places, not so close to the front line, but it's still not safe at all. We see the change of life values, and we see that poetry is actually, as stated by Musakovska, can be a weapon, that the words have value, and we also produce new cultural codes in that time. Thank you very much for your attention.